Imagine it's 2026. You've just bought a new laptop. Or maybe you're dusting off an older machine that feels slow under its current operating system. You've heard whispers online, seen YouTube thumbnails with dramatic titles, and maybe noticed that developers, gamers, and even everyday users are talking more about Linux than ever before. And now you're asking the question that once sounded intimidating. Can a complete beginner actually use Linux in 2026? Not a programmer? Not a cybersecurity expert? Not someone who types mysterious commands into a black terminal window. Just a regular person who wants to browse the web, watch videos, work on documents, maybe play some games, and get on with life. The honest answer is yes. A complete beginner can use Linux in 2026, and in many ways it has never been easier. But that simple answer deserves a deeper explanation, because the journey from I've only used Windows or macOS to I'm comfortable on Linux is less about technical skill and more about mindset, expectations, and the choices you make at the beginning. First, let's clear up one of the biggest myths. Linux is not a single operating system. It's a family of operating systems built around the Linux kernel. In 2026, when someone says they use Linux, they usually mean they use a Linux distribution, often called a distro. Popular beginner-friendly distros include Ubuntu, Linux, Mint, Zorin OS, and Fedora Workstation. These are not commandedly-knownly hacker environments. They are polished desktop systems with graphical interfaces, app stores, settings menus, and update notifications, just like Windows or macOS. If you can click icons, drag windows, and type into a search bar, you already have most of the skills required to start using Linux. What has changed dramatically by 2026 is the user experience. Modern Linux desktops look clean and professional. The installation process, once considered a technical hurdle, has become streamlined. You download an image, create a bootable USB drive using a simple tool, boot from it, and follow on-screen instructions. In many distributions, the installer feels no more complicated than setting up a new phone. You choose your language, keyboard layout, time zone, create a username and password, and decide whether to install alongside another operating system or replace it. For a complete beginner, the most intimidating part is often just the idea of doing something unfamiliar, not the actual steps involved. Once installed, the desktop environment becomes your daily home. Environments like GNOME, KDE Plasma, and Cinnamon are intuitive and visually appealing. You have a taskbar or dock, a menu of applications, a file manager, system settings, and a notification area. You can connect to Wi-Fi, pair Bluetooth devices, adjust display settings, and manage printers through graphical tools. In 2026, hardware compatibility has improved significantly. Most modern laptops, Wi-Fi cards, graphics, chips, and peripherals are recognized automatically. There are still edge cases, especially with very new or very obscure hardware, but for the average consumer laptop, things usually just work. One of the biggest concerns beginners have is software. They wonder, will I be able to do what I normally do? The answer depends on what you need, but for most everyday tasks, Linux is more than capable. Web browsing is handled by familiar browsers like Firefox and Chrome. Streaming services work in the browser. Office tasks can be done with LibreOffice, OnlyOffice, or web-based tools like Google Docs. Email clients, messaging apps, note-taking tools, and media players are all readily available. In fact, many popular applications now provide Linux versions or run smoothly through compatibility layers. Gaming used to be one of Linux's weakest points. In 2026, that narrative has shifted significantly thanks to advancements in technologies like Proton and the continued support from companies like Valve through the Steam platform. Many Windows games can now run on Linux with minimal setup. Performance is often close to native, and in some cases even better. A beginner who wants to play popular titles may find that most of their library works out of the box. There are still exceptions, particularly with certain anti-cheat systems, but the gap has narrowed dramatically. For casual and even mid-level gamers, Linux is no longer a non-starter. Now let's talk about the terminal, because it's impossible to discuss Linux without acknowledging it. Yes, the terminal still exists. Yes, it's powerful. And yes, you will see tutorials online that use it. But here's the key point. A complete beginner in 2026 can use Linux without ever touching the terminal for most daily tasks. Installing software can be done through graphical app stores. System updates are handled by update managers that notify you when new packages are available. Drivers and settings are often managed through GUI tools. The terminal becomes optional rather than mandatory. That said, many beginners eventually find themselves curious about the terminal, and when they do, they discover that it's not some forbidden zone, but a straightforward text interface where you type commands. The learning curve is real, but it's not insurmountable. Basic commands like updating your system or installing software follow simple patterns. Over time, the terminal becomes less of a source of fear and more of a powerful ally. But the important takeaway is that it's not a barrier to entry anymore. Security is another area where Linux shines, especially for beginners who want a system that feels stable and safe. Linux has a strong permissions model. Applications typically do not have unrestricted access to the entire system. Software is often installed from centralized repositories maintained by the distribution, reducing the risk of downloading malicious files from random websites. While no operating system is immune to threats, Linux has historically been less targeted by mainstream malware, and in 2026, its sandboxing and containerization technologies have matured even further. For a beginner, this often translates to fewer pop-ups, fewer forced restarts, and fewer worries about viruses. Performance is also worth mentioning. Many people try Linux on older machines and are surprised by how responsive it feels. Lightweight distributions can revive aging hardware that struggles under more resource-heavy systems. Even full-featured desktops tend to run efficiently. This can be empowering for a beginner who doesn't want to buy a new computer just to get acceptable performance. Linux offers the possibility of extending the life of existing hardware, which is both economically and environmentally appealing. However, it would be misleading to pretend that Linux in 2026 is perfect or completely frictionless. There are still differences compared to Windows or macOS that a beginner must adapt to. File system structure is different. The way software is packaged and installed can vary between distributions. Some proprietary software, especially certain professional tools, may not have native Linux versions. For example, specific industry-standard creative software or enterprise applications might require workarounds or alternatives. This can be a deal-breaker depending on your needs. Community support is one of Linux's greatest strengths, but it also requires a different mindset. Instead of calling a centralized customer support line, you often turn to forums, documentation, and community discussions. The upside is that answers to almost every common problem are already documented somewhere. The downside is that you may need to read through technical discussions to find a solution. For a beginner, this can feel overwhelming at first, but it also fosters independence and problem-solving skills. Over time, you learn how to search effectively, interpret error messages, and apply solutions. Another major factor in 2026 is the growth of user-friendly distributions, specifically targeting Windows switchers. Some distros are designed to look and behave similarly to Windows, with familiar layouts and workflows. This reduces the shock of transition. A beginner coming from Windows the 10th or the 11th of May find that the learning curve is more about discovering new names for familiar concepts rather than learning entirely new paradigms. The Start menu becomes an application launcher. The Control panel becomes system settings. File Explorer becomes a file manager. The underlying concepts remain largely the same. Cloud computing and web-based applications have also reduced the importance of operating system-specific software. In 2026, many people spend most of their time in a browser. If your workflow revolves around web apps, the operating system becomes more of a platform for accessing the internet rather than a gatekeeper of functionality. This trend benefits Linux tremendously because it means compatibility issues are less frequent. If you can open a browser and log into your services, you can work. For students and beginners interested in learning technology, Linux offers additional advantages. It provides a transparent environment where you can see how things are structured. You can explore system directories, understand processes, and experiment without paying licensing fees. This openness encourages curiosity. A complete beginner might start just wanting to browse and write documents, but over time they might discover scripting, development, or system customization. Linux doesn't force that path, but it makes it accessible. Customization is another hallmark of the Linux experience. In 2026, desktop environments are highly configurable. You can change themes, icons, layouts, animations, and behavior. For a beginner, this can be both exciting and overwhelming. The key is that customization is optional. You can use the default setup and never touch advanced settings, or you can gradually tweak things to your liking. This flexibility contrasts with more locked-down ecosystems and can feel liberating once you understand it. Let's address the emotional aspect of switching. For many beginners, the biggest barrier is fear. Fear of breaking something, fear of losing data, fear of being unable to return to what's familiar. In 2026, tools for dual booting and virtual machines make experimentations safer than ever. You can install Linux alongside your existing system and choose which one to boot. Or you can run Linux inside a virtual machine within your current OS to test it. This lowers the risk and gives beginners confidence to explore. Documentation has improved as well. Many distributions provide step-by-step guides, video tutorials, and beginner-focused documentation. Content creators have built entire channels around helping newcomers. Instead of cryptic forum posts from 2009, you now find updated walkthroughs tailored to modern versions. This ecosystem of educational content plays a huge role in making Linux approachable. Another important point is updates. On Linux, updates are generally centralized and efficient. Instead of separate updaters for every application, the system's package manager handles them together. In 2026, graphical update tools make this process seamless. You receive a notification, click Update, and the system handles the rest. Reboots are typically only required for kernel updates, not for every minor application patch. For a beginner, this feels smooth and less intrusive. Privacy is a growing concern globally, and Linux appeals to users who want more control over their data. Most Linux distributions do not collect extensive telemetry by default. The system is transparent, and you can see what is running. For a beginner who values privacy but doesn't want to dive into complex configurations, simply using a mainstream Linux distribution can already reduce exposure compared to more data-driven ecosystems. So can a complete beginner use Linux in 2026? Yes, but with a realistic understanding. If your needs are general computing, web browsing, media consumption, office work, light gaming, and everyday tasks, Linux can absolutely serve you well. If your work depends on very specific proprietary software that has no Linux equivalent, you may face challenges. The key is evaluating your requirements honestly before making the switch. The learning curve exists, but it is no longer a steep cliff. It's more like a gentle slope. The first few days may feel unfamiliar. You'll search for settings, you'll wonder where certain options are, but within a week or two, muscle memory adapts. You begin to navigate naturally. And after a month, you might look back and realize that the fear was bigger than the difficulty. In 2026, Linux is not just for enthusiasts, it's for students, freelancers, remote workers, gamers, writers, and everyday users. It's for people who want control, efficiency, and flexibility. It's for those who want to revive old hardware or avoid licensing costs. And most importantly, it's for anyone willing to learn something slightly different. Being a complete beginner is not a disqualification. It's simply a starting point. Every experienced Linux user was once someone staring at a new desktop, unsure of where to click. The difference in 2026 is that the path from beginner to comfortable user is smoother, better documented, and supported by a vibrant global community. So if you're watching this and wondering whether you're technical enough, the real question isn't about skill. It's about willingness. Are you willing to try something new? To read a few guides? To experiment a little? If the answer is yes, then Linux in 2026 is not only usable for a complete beginner, it might just surprise you.